She poured coffee and pie at the same truck stop for decades, smiling at truckers who never knew who she really was. When Dolores Matthews died at 83, bouquets of black and red roses arrived, each signed only, "Road Never Ends, the Patch." Then the Hells Angels walked into her memorial, and the truth about her life changed everything. What would you do if your grandmother carried a secret like this? The Lone Spur truck stop had never felt so quiet. Usually by dawn, the clatter of plates in the diner, the hiss of bacon on the griddle, and the steady rhythm of engines idling in the lot filled the air. But on this morning, even the regulars spoke in hushed voices. The woman who had made the place feel like home was gone. Dolores Matthews had died in her sleep at 83. No hospital machines, no final struggle, just silence in the tiny apartment above the diner. The news had swept through the truck stop the evening before, passed from driver to driver over CB, until every rig that pulled off I-40 seemed to carry the same somber expression when its driver walked in. "Like burying family," Earl Jackson murmured into his coffee, the rim of the mug hiding the tremor in his lower lip. He chased Dolores Meatloaf across state lines longer than most rigs on the lot had been rolling. He nursed a mug of coffee at the counter, staring into the dark liquid as if it could offer answers. Wilson Griddle Banks, the head cook, worked the line with a stiffness in his back that wasn't just age. He'd stumbled into this kitchen green as spring grass, and Dolores? She didn't just teach him to flip burgers. She taught him how to hold the line when the heat rose and voices cracked like dropped plates. She had been small, wiry, quick with a laugh, but Griddle had also seen flashes of something harder. Years back, when a drunk driver grabbed a waitress by the wrist, Dolores had pulled a switchblade from her apron pocket with a speed that stunned everyone. The blade never drew blood, just hovered, cold and certain, an inch from his throat. He left without another word, tripping over his own boots into the parking lot dark. Afterward, she cleaned the blood from the floor where the man had cut his hand, calm as if she'd done it before. He'd never forgotten that. And now, as he flipped pancakes no one wanted, he couldn't shake the thought. Dolores carried secrets. The first strange thing happened before breakfast rush. A delivery van pulled up, too polished for this dusty place. A driver in a clean polo shirt stepped inside carrying a tall bouquet of roses, black and red, arranged with almost military precision. "These for, Miss Matthews?" the man asked. Heads turned. Griddle wiped his hands on his apron, nodded stiffly, and pointed him toward the counter. The driver set the bouquet in front of the empty stool where Dolores always sat after her shift. Tied to the stems was a note card with only 5 words. "Road Never Ends, the Patch." The diner froze. "Who the hell's the Patch?" asked Luann, one of the younger waitresses. No one answered. Some of the old-timers shifted in their seats. A few truckers traded looks but said nothing. Griddle took the card in his rough fingers, his stomach twisting. He'd heard bikers use that term before. A man's patch was his identity, his family. Whoever sent this wasn't just some stranger. By lunch, whispers filled every booth. Some old boyfriend? A gang thing? You think she ran with them? But no one knew for sure. That night, another bouquet arrived. Larger this time, laced with crimson ribbons, the same words on the card. On the third day, it was a full floral arrangement in a wrought iron stand, the kind you'd see at a funeral. By the fourth, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. "Why would a waitress get flowers like that?" a driver muttered. "Because she wasn't just a waitress," Griddle thought, though he said nothing. The 5th morning, Amanda Matthews walked in. She looked out of place in the Lone Spur. Crisp blazer, suitcase wheels dragging behind her, phone clutched in one hand. At 28, she carried herself like someone who had built walls and wasn't about to let this place break them down. She was Dolores' granddaughter, though few here had ever met her. Chicago raised her after her mother died. No letters followed, no calls, just silence, thick and unbroken, stretching from the lakefront to this desert counter. To Amanda, her grandmother had been a myth, the woman who chose greasy diners over family. She had returned only because duty demanded it. When she saw the line of floral tributes, her jaw tightened. "So she had friends," she muttered. though the bitterness in her voice carried more hurt than anger. She slid into a booth near the counter, watching people glance at her with pity or curiosity. Griddle brought her coffee without asking. You her kin? Amanda nodded stiffly. Granddaughter. He studied her for a moment, recognizing the same sharpness in her eyes Dolores once had. She loved you in her way, he said carefully. Amanda let out a humorless laugh. Funny way of showing it. She stirred her coffee without tasting it, her gaze locked on the roses. Who keeps sending these? No one knows, Griddle admitted, but I reckon we're about to find out. That evening, he stayed after close, the diner too quiet, the smell of grease still hanging in the air. He unlocked Dolores' old locker in the back, a place she'd guarded fiercely. Inside he found little. A spare uniform, a rosary, an old lipstick tube, and at the very back, tucked under a faded towel, a Polaroid. The photo showed Dolores younger, standing beside a row of gleaming Harley-Davidsons. Her hair tied back in a scarf, her smile radiant but her eyes hard. Behind her was another truck stop, the sign reading Bakersfield, 1969. Griddle swallowed hard. He'd suspected she carried one hell of a story. Now he knew he was right. When he placed the Polaroid face down on the locker shelf, his hand brushed against the switchblade Dolores had carried for decades. He closed the metal door softly, muttering to himself. Kindness was only the surface, he whispered, closing the locker door. Steel ran through her veins. And outside, in the cool desert night, another delivery van pulled up with roses, darker, fuller, almost defiant. The card bore the same words. Road never ends. The patch. By the time Saturday arrived, the Lone Spur truck stop had become less a diner and more a shrine. Every flat surface seemed to hold flowers now. Red roses, black lilies, wreaths with silver ribbons. Truckers who had only stopped there once or twice in their lives swung back off the highway to pay respects, leaving patches from their companies, dog tags, or handwritten notes beside the growing memorial at Dolores' booth. Amanda held court at the counter, fingers locked around a mug gone cold. She didn't drink, just watched the flowers, the strangers, the way their grief draped over the diner like a second skin. She couldn't decide what unsettled her more, the strangers grieving like family, or the sight of those cards signed the patch. Each bouquet hammered in the truth she didn't want to face. There was a part of Dolores' life Amanda had never been allowed to see. The day of the memorial service came hot and dry, sunlight cutting harsh angles across the cracked asphalt lot. The diner filled early, truckers sliding into booths beside locals, veterans in faded caps taking off their hats as they entered. Wilson Griddle Banks worked the kitchen but wandered out more than usual, checking the room with restless eyes. He still had the Polaroid tucked in his pocket, the one showing Dolores beside the row of Harleys. He hadn't told Amanda about it yet. Something told him the truth needed the right moment. By mid-afternoon, the air had turned heavy, thick with silence that hung over the clink of silverware and the shuffle of boots. Amanda stood reluctantly when asked to say a few words. She cleared her throat, voice tight. I didn't know her like you all did, she admitted. I thought she chose this place over me, over family. But seeing all of you here, maybe she gave more of herself than I ever realized. It wasn't much, but it broke something open inside her. As she sat back down, her eyes caught the wall clock above the door, just as the room fell silent. The door swung wide, and a line of men filled the frame. Broad shoulders, heavy boots, leather vests catching the late sun as they stepped into the hush of the diner. Their leather vests were faded but unmistakable, colors bright against the dust. Hell's Angels. Full patches. Every set of eyes in the diner locked onto them. The scrape of chairs against the floor stopped. For a moment, even the humming neon seemed to buzz lower. Amanda's heart thudded. She'd never seen bikers like these outside of a headline. They were older, gray in their beards, their steps slower with age, but the weight of their presence was undeniable. Each vest bore a lifetime of scars stitched into patches, road names, memorial rockers, battle-worn insignia. Without a word, the lead man, tall and broad-shouldered with silver hair pulled into a braid, walked to Dolores' booth. He placed a thick, leather-bound scrapbook on the table, rested his hand on it for a beat, then stepped back. The others joined him in silence, their heads bowed. No threats, no speeches, just reverence. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Amanda stared, her throat dry, as one of the bikers slid into the booth. He nodded to the flowers, then gestured for her to open the book. With shaking hands, she pulled it closer. The leather was cracked, smelling faintly of smoke and oil. On the first page was a black and white photograph. Dolores in her 30s, standing behind the lone Spurs counter, a cigarette in her fingers and a smile that was all mischief. Tucked beside it was a letter, written in her careful script. Amanda read the opening lines aloud without meaning to. If you are reading this, I am gone. I never wanted you to carry my burdens. Amanda, I kept my distance to keep you safe. But I want you to know who I was, and why strangers may remember me better than family. Her voice faltered. She turned the page and the past unfolded in fragments. Dolores beside polished Harleys, a scarf holding back her hair, grease staining her palms. Dolores caught mid-laughter at a desert bonfire, shadows of vests flickering around her. Then a brittle newspaper clipping, its headline whispering of a violent clash in '68. Before Amanda could process it, the door opened again. Donnie's sidearm Clayton shuffled in, leaning hard on his cane. The retired hauler had just come off surgery, his face still pale, but he wouldn't miss this. When he saw the angels in the booth, his jaw tightened. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. She never told me. The lead angel looked up. Recognition passed between the two men, something unspoken and heavy. You were the driver, weren't you? The angel asked in a low gravel voice. Sidearm froze, then nodded. New Mexico, night run. She begged me to keep quiet. I thought I was just hauling freight. Never knew I was carrying a life in my cab. Amanda gripped the scrapbook tighter. What life? She demanded, her voice sharper than intended. The biker glanced at her, then back at Sidearm. Johnny Vega, the biker said, the name settling like dust after a slammed door. Bullet in his gut, cops hunting him like coyotes. Your grandmother dragged him into the freezer, stitched him up while the world outside screamed for his blood. She kept him breathing, and she made him believe peace was worth more than blood. Amanda sat back, stunned, as the weight of the revelation settled. Around her, truckers who had known Dolores their whole lives sat in silence, realizing they'd never truly known her at all. Griddle pulled the Polaroid from his pocket and laid it on the booth beside the scrapbook. Found this in her locker, he said. Guess she carried her ghosts close. The lead angel placed a weathered hand over both photo and book. She saved one of us when no one else would. That's why we're here. That's why the road remembers her. The room stayed hushed, every eye fixed on the scrapbook that seemed to hum with decades of hidden history. Amanda swallowed hard, her anger cracking into something more painful, the beginnings of understanding. And as the sun dipped low, the light through the diner windows turned the leather vests and faded patches into silhouettes against the glowing sky, shadows of a story only just beginning to unfold. Amanda couldn't sleep that night. Long after the memorial crowd had thinned, she sat alone in her grandmother's booth, the scrapbook open under the dim light of the diner. The photographs stared back at her, fragile windows into a world she'd never been allowed to see. Grease-stained letters folded between the pages carried words that shook her more than any stranger's story could. One page in particular drew her in, a yellowed sheet of notebook paper with Dolores' neat cursive. I made a choice in 1968. The man bleeding on my floor was a stranger, a biker with the odds stacked against him. I could have turned him away. Instead, I opened the freezer door. Amanda read it twice, heart pounding. She could picture her grandmother, younger, determined, pressing gauze to a wound in the back room of this very diner. Wilson Griddle Banks eased into the booth across from her. His hands were scarred from decades at the stove, but he held the scrapbook with unexpected gentleness. She told me once, he said, voice low, that everybody gets tested. Some folks show mercy, others don't. Guess we know which side she stood on. Amanda looked at him, her voice sharp from fatigue. Why didn't she tell me? Why hide it? Griddle met her eyes. Because some secrets keep you safe. If the wrong people knew she helped Vega, you'd have grown up with a target on your back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the Polaroid he'd shown the room earlier. Dolores standing in front of the Bakersfield truck stop with a line of Harleys. He set it on the table like a puzzle piece fitting into place. She carried it all these years, not out of pride, but memory. Before Amanda could reply, the scrape of boots drew her attention. Donnie Sidearm Clayton was making his way toward them, cane tapping the floor. He had stayed behind after everyone left, his face unreadable under the harsh light. I drove him out, he said without preamble, lowering himself into the booth. New Mexico run. Thought it was just cargo in the trailer. Didn't find out until years later that Dolores had loaded a man in there. Half dead, bleeding, clutching onto life. Amanda's breath caught. And you never said anything? Sidearm shook his head. She asked me not to. Said the fewer who knew, the better. I figured she was protecting herself. Now I see she was protecting all of us. Griddle leaned forward. So it's true. She saved Johnny Vega. The old hauler nodded slowly. And more than that, he didn't just survive. He changed. Built bridges between rival chapters. Kept a dozen wars from spilling onto these roads. Every angel in that booth tonight was living proof of what she did in that freezer. Amanda traced her finger over the words on the page again, her throat tight. The bitterness she'd carried from Chicago, sharp as broken glass in her pocket, began to splinter. Not all at once, just one shard at a time. What if all those silences had been shields? What if the distance had been love in its most complicated form? She flipped to another section of the scrapbook. Faded photographs of bonfires and desert lots, rows of Harleys glinting under moonlight, Dolores' smile caught in candid moments among leather-clad men who looked at her with respect, not threat. Letters tucked in envelopes carried Vega's handwriting, thanking her each year on the anniversary of his survival. I ride in peace because of you. Amanda blinked back tears she didn't want to admit were there. Griddle broke the silence. Folks thought she was just the woman with the coffee pot. But look around, truckers, vets, even angels came to sit at her booth. That don't happen unless you're made of something strong. Sidearm shifted, wincing from his hip. She never asked for credit. That's what gets me. Never bragged, never told the tale. Kept it locked up tighter than the freezer she hid him in. That kind of loyalty, it's rare. Amanda closed the scrapbook softly. The leather creaked like a door shutting. I thought she didn't want me, but she was just afraid her past would find me. The words sat heavy, truer than anything she had allowed herself to believe in years. Through the diner's windows, the desert stretched wide and dark, headlights flickering along the interstate. Somewhere out there, engines roared. Truckers passing the story over CB, bikers carrying their own quiet tribute. Dolores' secret, once buried, was spreading like wildfire, not as shame but as legacy. Griddle rose, laying a firm hand on Amanda's shoulder. Whatever you do next, do it proud. That's how she lived. Amanda sat alone again after they left, her fingers resting on the scrapbook. She imagined Dolores in 1968, standing before the freezer door, knowing that opening it might change everything. Amanda felt the weight not just of loss but of inheritance. Her grandmother's story wasn't over. It was hers now too. The Lone Spur truck stop glowed in the twilight like a lantern on the edge of the desert. Neon buzzed above the doorway, the smell of strong coffee and fried onions curling out into the warm evening. But the air inside was different tonight. The usual chatter was gone, replaced by a quiet reverence, as if every clink of a spoon acknowledged the absence of the woman who had once held this place together. Amanda moved from table to table, a pot of coffee in one hand, plates balanced in the other. She wasn't wearing a pressed blazer anymore. Instead, she'd rolled up the sleeves of a borrowed Waitress uniform, her hair tied back, the edges of her grief softening into determination. She had no idea what tomorrow would look like, but she knew tonight she belonged here. The booths were crowded. Truckers who had pulled in from states away shared space with veterans wearing faded caps and the same Seven Hells Angels who had placed the scrapbook on Dolores' booth the day before. They weren't talking much, just sipping coffee, nodding when others looked their way. No threats, no swagger, just men remembering someone who had once changed one of their own. At the far end of the room, Donnie's sidearm, Clayton tapped his glass with the handle of his fork. The conversations hushed. He rose slowly, leaning hard on his cane, the weight of years and surgeries visible in his posture. But his voice, when it came, carried across the room with the grit of a man who had spent half his life on the highway. Most of you knew Dolores as the woman with the apron and the smile. I knew her as something more. In '68, she saved a man's life, and in doing so, she kept blood off these roads for decades. She never asked for thanks, never told the story, because she believed loyalty meant silence. Tonight, we break that silence, not to expose her, but to honor her. To let the world know that the woman who poured our coffee was a giant. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tarnished medallion, the kind truckers used to pass among themselves, a sign of respect on the road. Sidearm placed it on Dolores' booth, beside the scrapbook and the flowers. His hand lingered there. From all of us who rode these highways under her watch, thank you, Dolores. The road never forgot you. For a moment, no one breathed. Then a murmur rippled through the room. Truckers lifted their mugs. Veterans nodded solemnly. Even the angels dipped their heads, a rare silence that carried more weight than words. Out on the CB, Sidearm's voice carried. He had called in earlier, telling drivers from Arizona to Texas about the gathering, about the woman whose kindness had rippled farther than she ever admitted. And across the desert highways, rigs responded. One by one, marker lights flickered on in tribute, glowing like candles stretched across the interstate. Through the diner's windows, Amanda could see the shimmer of headlights pulling into the lot, engines idling in unison, drivers paying their respects with the only language they knew: steel, diesel, and light. Amanda set down her coffee pot and pressed her hands against the counter, her chest tightening. She had come here angry, ready to leave this dusty town behind forever. But seeing the way strangers honored Dolores, how men hardened by war and road lowered their heads for her grandmother, she felt pride rising through the cracks of grief. Griddle appeared from the kitchen carrying a wooden plaque. He had worked on it quietly for days, sanding the edges in between orders, painting the words in bold strokes. With care, he mounted it on the wall above Dolores' booth. The room leaned forward to read the inscription. For Dolores Matthews, she served the road, and the road carried her forever. The words settled over Amanda like a benediction. She poured another round of coffee, this time steady-handed. When she reached the angel's table, the man with the silver braid looked up at her. She saved Johnny Vega, he said simply. And in saving him, she saved us all. Don't ever forget that. Amanda nodded, unable to speak, but she didn't need to. By midnight, the lot outside throbbed with idling engines. Chrome glinted under the moonlight as truckers and bikers leaned against their machines, voices low, smoke from their cigarettes curling into the desert sky like offerings. Amanda stepped outside, the desert night pressing cool against her skin, and looked at the glowing line of rigs stretched along the horizon. It wasn't a funeral march. It was a living convoy, a promise that Dolores' story would keep rolling long after the flowers faded. She thought of Chicago, of the empty apartment she had planned to return to, and realized she didn't want to go back. This place wasn't just her grandmother's legacy anymore. It was hers to carry. The next morning, Amanda unlocked the bakery corner of the truck stop, a space that had sat idle for years. She tied on a flour-dusted apron and began mixing dough, her movements clumsy but determined. By noon, the smell of fresh pie drifted through the diner. She set the first slice in front of Sidearm with a small, nervous smile. "Vega's pie," she said. "On the house. Every Memorial Day, it'll be free for vets and bikers." Sidearm chuckled, tapping his fork against the plate. She'd be proud. Amanda looked around the diner, the filled booths, the glowing plaque, the scrapbook resting where everyone could see. The room no longer felt hollow. Every hum of neon, Every clink of a spoon carried her grandmother's presence. The road outside rumbled with the sound of engines firing up again, men and women returning to their routes. But before they left, each one paused at the booth, laying down a coin, a patch, or just their hand against the wood. Promise made in silence. And as the sun climbed high, Amanda wiped the counter clean, her heart steady. She had come here to bury a stranger. Instead, she had found her family. The Lone Spur truck stop would never be the same, and neither would she. This story reminds us that even ordinary lives can hold extraordinary legacies. Dolores was just a waitress, but her kindness shaped roads and riders for generations. What would you have done if you uncovered a secret like hers? Comment below with your thoughts. And if this story moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to Embrace the Journey, where we keep stories like this alive.